Welcome back. In my last video, I shared a clip from Cathie Wood describing her thesis for ARK Invest on Palantir stock. Today, I'm continuing that sort of discussion with a clip from an interview Dave Lee on Investing just had with a couple ARK Invest analysts. So in this video, I will be playing that edited clip, give my analysis on what they say and what it means for the future of Palantir, as well as ARK Invest, and whether they will, in my opinion, be releasing any research other than this just verbal communication that I'm very grateful now that they have started doing more recently. So I'll get to that and more. But first, I just wanted to say it's been so insightful to see that Cathie Wood clip, as well as what you are now about to see if you have not already, because it really is the first time we've gotten a deep dive into what their thinking is, why they've bought so much Palantir stock, and what it means for the future. Because sure, ARK Invest open sources their trades, but they don't open source every line of thinking behind them. So with that said, here's a few-minute clip I edited down from Dave Lee's channel with Will Summerlin, an AI and software as a service analyst from ARK Invest. And if you've already seen this, again, go ahead and skip ahead.
Where do you currently stand on, for example, their AI expertise, their defensible, let's say, moat or advantage, and their projections to grow revenue, let's say even 50% or more per year for the next 5 years?
I think there are a couple trends that I think are interesting with Palantir. They got a tailwind from COVID with government contracts. And I think as we started to exit COVID, and I guess you could argue now start to re-enter COVID to a degree, that tailwind hasn't slowed down in the sense that while maybe their core contracts related to COVID are running up, we see government agencies, both federal, state, across the world, reintroducing Palantir to solve other problems within their agency. And so I think for government side of Palantir, I think COVID was actually a great beachhead into many organizations and agencies across the world that they wouldn't have worked with otherwise, or would have worked with much later in their life cycle. And so I think there's a strong tailwind of sort of government adoption in that sense. And I think from an enterprise perspective, they gave an example in their last earnings call where Boeing actually switched to a joint venture software platform of Palantir and Airbus away from something that they home grew with Microsoft. I think that's a great sort of indication as to what's happening across the board with enterprises when it comes to Palantir. Often they're competing with a homegrown solution. In many cases, it's Palantir versus, hey, let's build this platform ourselves. And there are certain advantages to doing both, but it seems like the choice is tipping towards Palantir in many cases, and we think that's going to continue. Also interesting is the sort of move down market in the activity with SPAC investments. And their thesis around this is, hey, we're going to invest in a company early in its life cycle, get them to build their company on top of our platform, and then we'll grow with them. And I think this sort of organic story of, hey, we're going to be the platform that helps a company build their first product or build a series of products and then grow with that company is really interesting. And, to me, Palantir is interesting in that that's sort of a new customer demographic where I think there's a lot of greenfield opportunity. You have the government sector, which we just talked about, that has that kind of tailwind continuing. And then you also have the traditional enterprise. Palantir started in the commercial side with big enterprises, right? Selling $10 million contracts to, giant companies. And I think that's continuing. And I think companies are acquiring more data than ever. They need to start to layer AI on top of all of their, their processes in order to stay competitive. And I think Palantir has sort of been in an advantaged position to help those companies through that transition. So overall, yeah, I think it's an interesting story. Given all of that and given sort of the head start that they had many, many years ago with the government, I think it'll be an interesting story over the next 5 or 10 years.
So again, that was Will Summerlin, Artificial Intelligence and Software as a Service at ARK Invest, being questioned by Dave Lee on Investing. I'll leave his channel links in the description. Oh, and by the way, I reached out to Dave a couple times. He said he's aware of this channel, but he has not accepted my requests to appear on it, just to let you know. So now for my analysis of the conversation. So I think there were some great points made here. The first of which was that the government contract tailwinds are not over. And as a result of COVID, there were many government government contracts for Palantir that benefited them. But what Will said right off the bat, which this hasn't slowed down. Even though the pandemic is hopefully coming to an end, agencies are still using Palantir to solve general problems. And it really is a beachhead strategy, as he said, which means a small, broader area that becomes a stronghold and continues advancement from that point. So Palantir gets in. It's a Trojan horse into the government, into some of these agencies. Yes, they were already in the government, but COVID strikes and they're the ones that can handle that situation. So they're in. And then all of a sudden these agencies realize we actually love Palantir. We want to continue to use their software, even though the pandemic is no longer an issue or what we need to solve for. And that really is huge, and it speaks to the versatility of Palantir's software. And he also mentioned how there is a tailwind in government adoption, which I think we have really seen more recently. There have been contracts more recently that even I haven't covered, but I really do think the government platform is in a very, very strong position, especially coming through this pandemic. The second point is that Palantir is competing with the homegrown solution. Of course, this is something Palantir themselves say that is their competition, their clients' willingness to develop their own internal solution. We have known this all along, but here's what Will Summerlin said, and I think this is really key. He said there are both advantages to using Palantir and developing your own software. He's not saying Palantir is the best, and he's not saying that Palantir can't compete with the internally developed solutions. He's saying there are advantages to each, which really means that Palantir has to fight, has to deliver a competitive product, and I think that really is a key point. Palantir has to price competitively, has to do more than internal solutions ever could, be that through versatility, as I mentioned before, or a higher level artificial intelligence that just you couldn't really develop on your own, no matter how much you spent on it. And he said that really is leading to the choice tipping towards Palantir between should we spend all this money and all this time developing our own internal solution for our enterprise, or should we just pick Palantir to save money and time? And he said the choice really is leaning towards Palantir. So again, really great to hear from him. That is a core thesis for the investment in Palantir, is that their software is good enough and competitive enough that it is a competitive disadvantage, I'll get to that in a second, to develop your own internal solution. First of all, for time, second of all, for cost, and third of all, you may also be missing features and functionality. Third point here was the move down market, which is something I've covered very much on this channel. He brought up the SPAC investments early in the life cycle of these companies, and he talked about growing with them. And this is something I've said before. This is something I really like about Palantir's strategy. Will said how Palantir is the company that enables the technology and then grows with that customer demographic. We haven't really seen this before, especially with a strategic partnership in the sense that they buy equity in the company and also leverage that partnership, which I call strategic leveraged association, in a sense that they are partnered more directly than they would be otherwise with just a contract. It really is a way for Palantir to leverage its software and its belief in itself, its conviction in its own products, saying our products are so good, they're going to help you grow, we're going to invest in you so that when you grow, we get a return on our capital. It's really 4D chess if it works out. But Will Summerlin's broader point, this is part of the move down market, these SPAC investments, which really is key and not something to lose sight of. And then we had one penultimate point being the traditional enterprise. Now, earlier on in the interview, I'm not going to play this part, but I believe it was Will Summerlin. He was talking a lot about the enterprise, and he said enterprise AI is what we believe is going to be one of the biggest AIs, is going to deliver some of the biggest value in this decade. And he was going on about it, and he really made me think that ARK is probably nearing a release of a report on enterprise AI. And who, of course, would be included in that report? Well, none other than Palantir. So I think they're outlining Palantir for a research report in the future. Maybe it's not going to specifically mention Palantir, but more research on the enterprise AI side of things would be huge for us investors, and I really can't wait for it to come. This is my prediction. I think ARK is working on, whether it's a white paper, whether it's just an article, I think they're putting together projections for how big this AI for enterprise can be in the future. And that goes along with this next point, where he said companies are acquiring more data than ever. Of course, this is another key thesis. If companies are acquiring more data than ever, they need to be able to process that data to maintain a competitive advantage, or not even fall behind. So how are they going to process that data? How are they going to generate intelligence, layer AI on top of those processes? Well, Palantir helps with that need, and they help with that competitive advantage. Thesis is, if you're running Palantir software effectively and it's customized in the right way, you actually come out ahead. You get insights before anyone else, etc. So my final thing I will say here is that he mentioned a 5 to 10 year time horizon for Palantir, which very much aligns with ARK's thinking as a whole. And he also said that Palantir really does have a head start, or they did initially, with their government work, which has now led into the code base, I believe, for their Foundry product. And Palantir being ahead really is like many other tech and innovative companies being ahead, whether it's with talent, whether it's with their actual product. It's really hard to pass a company that's already ahead. We've seen it with Tesla. We've seen it with so many other companies. So it remains to be seen if that will play out or not with Palantir. But I really hope my analysis of this was helpful. Again, I'm sorry for the bad audio, but I do not have a dedicated sound room, so I hope you appreciate it nonetheless. What are your recent thoughts on Palantir? Until next time.